Erev Tov from Jerusalem. Good morning to all of you who have already gathered and people are still coming in. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. It's wonderful to see new faces. Thank you for joining us for what I am sure is going to be both interesting and I think of some importance for so many of the people on this call that I'm familiar with. So we are holding this webinar just a short time after the new government has been sworn in. And this webinar is co-sponsored, as is our custom, by Ruach Hidush, the trans-denominational rabbinic and cantorial network that is quite unique in the Jewish world because it consists of rabbis truly of all denominations who are all committed to the mission of religious freedom and equality. And I do not see everybody on this call yet, but I know that Rabbi Rachel Yurovitz is with us from our executive committee, and I'm sure a few others are as well. And JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network. And I saw Mark Enshen. Rabbi Schachter was talking about Canada being represented, so definitely Mark Enshen is co-chair of our JPLAN, Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and I assume Judge Buxbaum and David Light will be joining as well. And the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. The topic is, what can we expect the new government to bring under its wings in terms of religion and state and in terms of the relationship with world Jewry, with our communities, whether they are modern Orthodox or non-Orthodox. Rabbi MK attorney Gilad Kariv will be joining us, but I have to warn you in advance, that which I feared did materialize, namely the poor members of the coalition find themselves in need to keep watch, and the plenum meetings are extending beyond the planned schedule, and with such a flimsy majority, namely, theoretically, the coalition consists of 61 out of the 120 Knesset members, but in truth, these 61 are, made of different colors, different shades, and quite a number of them are not necessarily going to be voting on everything that the others would like to. As if you follow the news from Israel, you realize is actually just happening now. So the Gilad staff have contacted me and said the plenum is extending. It was supposed to be finished by now, but he will, in a few minutes, he will tear himself off the plenum for just a little while to be with us, and we'll take a rain check and spend more time with him in the future. But we'll hear whatever he will manage to cover, and I will present you with as comprehensive as possible picture of all aspects of religion and state that may be emanating from this new government coalition, the light, the dark, and the in-between, and it has all of it, as you will see. So let me start by, again, thanking all of you who are with us. Do use the chat to write questions or comments, and hopefully we'll be able to get them, but don't think that the opportunity to have an exchange is limited to merely the time that we have together on Zoom. Don't hesitate. Write me. Write us, ask questions, make comments, suggest topics, suggest speakers. We would love to be able to further enrich and expand this experience, and look forward to your help. All right, so let me share the screen and we'll jump right into it. And I told Gilad's staff that we will be making ourselves available to him as soon as, just a minute, let me see. Yeah, as soon as he's available to us. So the new government has been welcomed in quotes, I guess, triple quotes, by the Haredi community with a fierce reception. This is just a few days ago, June 10th, the headline of Haderech, the official organ of Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party. I think that even those who don't speak Hebrew can understand that the main headline is pretty dramatic and pretty bloody. So what it says is, Sakin belev ha'umah, digging a knife into the heart of the nation. Namely, what this coalition represents, and not necessarily because of its position on security, settlements, etc., but what they describe as their position on issues of religion and state, is amounting to, in their view, striking a knife into the heart of the nation. And further down it says, Memshelet Akirat Hadat Ma'amedina. This is a government that's going to uproot religion from the state of Israel. The Yated Ne'eman, the official organ, the official daily newspaper of Degel HaTorah, of the party that is the party of Rabbi Moshe Gafni, the longtime chair of the Knesset Finance Committee, who is now being removed from his seat by Israel Beiteinu, by a Knesset member from the Russian Olim Party, Oded Fuhrer. So their main headline a few days ago, June 13th, was Reformim al Yisrael, Utsu Eitza Vetufar. Reform are taking over Israel. Plan your plans, they will be spoiled, nothing will help you. Basically appealing to God that he may do something to change this this reality when in the new government, the reform movement, Reform Jews, and by the way, they use reform as a generic name. It's reform, it's conservative, it's reconstructionist. I think they probably call some of the modern Orthodox reform as well. They certainly use this term to describe. Just a second, this is Gilad's assistant. 1 second. Hello? Ken. Oh, רגע, מיד אני מכניס. Okay. Yeah. Well, in talking, I have not allowed people in. And one of them is Gilad Kariv and Dick Hirsch. Boy, oh boy. All right. So this is a very opportune moment for Gilad to join us because of the headline. All right. So Gilad, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Wonderful, we certainly can. And you can see the headline, Reformim al Israel, Utsu Eitza Vetufar. So in the eyes of our less friendly core religionists, this is about a reform takeover. So let me just introduce you in a couple of words. I've explained that your time is short and we are grateful that you are with us. And let me just stop the sharing so we'll be able to, so we'll be able to see you better. 1 second. Okay. Judge Buxbaum. But Gilad, say a word. Are you with the camera?
Hello. Yes, I'm with the camera.
All right. Wonderful. Okay. So we are grateful to you, Gilad. You are really a trooper. I remember in the previous webinar, you spoke to us from your car. You pulled off the road in order to participate. We are very appreciative. And today I explained the plenum is extending and extending, and the opposition is laying trap. And you are all with this narrow margin of 61, coalition of 61. You really have to all be on your seats. So Gilad, we have just had an amazing farewell to him when the Israel movement, the reform movement in Israel, and Maram, the Israel Council of Progressive Rabbis, and the Hebrew Union College, and the Reform Youth, etc., all were coming together Saturday night for a farewell event, which was moving, which was just amazing. But it was a farewell to Gilad, who put the movement in the last 25 years of his involvement with the movement. And how many years since you were executive director?
12. 12 years since
12 years as executive
2009.
director, has built on the shoulders of the likes of Dick Hirsch, Rabbi Dick Hirsch, who is with us, and others, and has really expanded the reach of the movement in so many ways. So we are grateful to you. And now in your new chapter, you are designated to be the next chair of the Law and Constitution Committee of the Knesset. And there is a lot of good that we are all looking forward to you doing. The webinar today is dedicated to the question of what can we expect the new government to bring under its wings in terms of issues of religion and state, pluralism, and the relationship with world Jewry. So as long as you can spend with us, the microphone is yours.
So, shalom, good afternoon, dear friends. Rabbi Uri, thank you, not only for the introduction, but for your ongoing leadership inside or in the Israeli reform movement and in many, many other Israeli and global circles that are all committed to promote freedom of religion here in Israel, Jewish diversity and religious pluralism. I apologize for joining late and for the fact that I don't have a lot of time. I said to Uri, to Rabbi Regev, that I'm always committed to work with Chidush in order to promote the dialogue between Israelis from all shades of Judaism and good partners from the overseas communities that share with us the basic understanding that without promoting religious pluralism in Israel and without implementing the promise of Israel's Declaration of Independence for religious freedom, the entire Zionist is under a threat. And we are working hard in the Israeli civil society, around the Jewish world, and we are working inside the Israeli Knesset, and I think today also in the corridors of the Israeli government in order to promote this understanding and to implement the necessary steps in order to enter the promised land. Now, I would like to start with the last presentation that Uri presented to us, this title from Yated Ne'eman, one of the ultra-Orthodox daily newspapers in Israel. And before I address Uri's direct question about what we can expect from the new government, I want to say that regardless to the things that we can achieve, And regardless to the things that are mentioned in the different coalition agreements, it is clear that the combination of having a modern Orthodox prime minister, and I can even say a light modern Orthodox or a moderate modern Orthodox prime minister for the first time in the history of Israel, this fact, together with me being in the Knesset, and I want to mention that I am the first Reform rabbi in the Knesset, but since last Wednesday, we have another prominent leader of the non-Orthodox movement in Israel as a Knesset member, Professor Alon Tal, who was and still is one of the leaders of the Israeli conservative movement, a lay leader of the Israeli conservative movement, joined the Knesset as a member of Blue and White party, and he will work with me closely in order to promote our values. And I also want to mention that another Knesset member from the Meretz faction joined the Knesset last week, and she's a congregant of Beit Daniel, the Reform congregation in Tel Aviv, M.K. Michal Rozin. And for the first time, there is a solid representation for the non-Orthodox movements, for the egalitarian liberal movements in the Knesset. And maybe for the first time, we're not talking about people that support our cause, but we are talking about Knesset members that are involved directly in the work, and in the case of Professor Alon Tal and myself in the leadership of the two egalitarian movements. Of having the East Party in the coalition, together with us playing a role there, brings the ultra-Orthodox parties to use this issue of religion and state and Jewish pluralism as their main sword in their crusade against the new government. And it's not only in the titles of the ultra-Orthodox newspapers. The number of occasions that the ultra-Orthodox Knesset members are using the word reform Jews or reformim in their speeches is unprecedented. And actually, this is becoming to be their main discourse after the new government was sworn. And I'm saying it because one of the things we need to understand is that we are facing a new serious wave of incitement against the liberal egalitarian streams in Israel. It is true that this time it is coming not from the seats of the coalition, it's coming from the seats of the opposition, but still, if we are talking about the level of incitement, if we're talking about its impact on people that might take extreme measures, we need to understand that because we are now part of the government, we will have to deal with a growing level of incitement. A few hours ago, I hosted the leadership of Shota Kotel, Women of the Wall, together with Professor Alon Tal and other MKs, and in the Knesset, because the violence we saw this last Rosh Chodesh in the Kotel is indeed troubling. And we will do what we need to do, or what we can do, in order to change the attitude of the police, and the fact that the Ministry of Homeland Security is today coming from my party makes it much easier to place this issue of incitement and violence on their table and radar. Now I'm going to Uri's question, what we can expect from the new government. And here I would like to suggest that we need to divide the answer to three parts. Two parts or two elements are quite positive, and the third one forces us to be tolerant, to understand that the change is not, or all the things we want to achieve are not around the corner, and that it's going to be a process. I will start with the two positive elements. The first one is the dramatic shift in the language, the discourse, and the attitude of the new government. And you could have seen it in the opening speech of Minister Nachman Shai, the new Minister for Diaspora Affairs. If the former ministries, Minister Omer Yankelevich, Deputy Minister Tzipi Chotobeli, and former Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, Naftali Bennett, today the Prime Minister, all three of them held a very positive discourse towards our causes, but it was always around the motherhood and apple pie discourse. We love all Jews. We want Israel. Israel should respect all Jews. It was never about the things that the state of Israel really has to do in order to present its deep respect to all streams of Judaism. And when you hear or read Nachman Shai's opening speech, you see that he uses a different discourse. And he is talking in a very direct way about the need to secure the full recognition of all Jewish religious streams by the state of Israel. And it's in a very clear way that when we are talking about equality as a necessary and fundamental constitutional value in Israel, this concept includes equality between all Jews, all Jewish communities, all Jewish rabbis, and all Jewish streams. And I would like to suggest that we should not undermine the importance of the new of this new discourse. When today the Ministry of Religious Affairs that comes from Naftali Bennett party and is fully identified with modern Orthodoxy in Israel, when he is leading the debate with the ultra-Orthodox opposition Knesset members, and he is the one that talks about the need to create a shift in the status quo. And this person, Matan Kahana, till few months ago, was the most vocal defender of the Rabbanut Rashit, of the chief rabbinate in Israel. And when he is speaking today from the pulpit about the need to create understanding, about the need to explore different concepts for different issues of religion and state, when he talks about the need not to hold a black and white philosophy, and to understand that there are different Israeli and non-Israeli Jewish perspectives about this issue of religion and state, you understand that we have here a potential to develop a much more matured Israeli political discourse about the issue of religious pluralism, and this is one positive element. The second positive element has to do with the fact that maybe for the first time, we have an opportunity to strengthen the communal, educational, social infrastructures of our movements and the other organizations in Israel that are working to promote religious pluralism. And here we need to understand, and this is something Chidush is talking about for many years. We are talking about it when we are talking about religion and state relations in Israel, when we are talking about the lack of recognition in our movements. It's not only about the laws that the Israeli Knesset legislated or the laws that we are not legislating. It's also, and I will suggest that sometimes it's even mainly about the fact that the Israeli government is investing more than $1 billion a year in the Orthodox establishment, in the infrastructures of the ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox monopoly in Israel. And I think that for the first, we have an opportunity to bring different ministries in the government, and the best example is the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, to invest public resources. And it's not only about money, it's about who is sitting around the table and shaping the policy. I think that we have a real opportunity to work from inside, not only from the branches of the Israeli civil society. And we need to remember that we spent many years in the opposition, and this wisdom of how to be part of the administration or how to connect the executive branch with the civil society, this is the one that we need to learn. But we need to do it in a very rapid manner. And we need to make sure that if in the next 6 weeks, we will have a national budget for 2 years, 2 years during we didn't have a national budget, we need to make sure that this coming national budget is already reflecting a more balanced investment of the government, or at least the beginning of serious investment of our government, current government, in the promotion of Jewish diversity and religious pluralism in Israel. And I believe we will be able to do it, and this is something we are working out to achieve. The third and last element, and then unfortunately I will have to go and vote in the plenum. The third element is more complicated. It's not totally negative, but it is more complicated. And here, in order to understand, we analyze the compilation agreements that were signed as a agreement. And what happened this time was that there are two sets of coalition agreements. One set is the coalition agreements between Yesh Atid and all the other 5 parties that are in Yesh Atid bloc inside the government. The parties are the Labour Party, Meretz, Blue and White, Israel Beiteinu, the Russian-speaking party, and Blue and White. And in those agreements, in all 5 of them, there is a serious list of goals in the area of religion and state. This list doesn't reflect all our goals and plans, but it definitely represents a major forward in this area of religion and state. It talks about reviving the Kotel Agreement. It talks about expanding what we call the Brit HaZugiyut, the coupled agreement, as a partial solution to the challenges we have with marriage and divorce. We are not satisfied with this solution, but definitely it presents some steps, taking steps forward. It talks about civil burial. It talks about transportation on Shabbat. It talks about different issues. This is a very positive development because this is the first time that all these left Zionist parties in Israel agree on a joint agenda around issues of religion and state, and an agenda that, according to our political analysis, is something that we might implement through the new government. And this is definitely, I don't think we have another example from the political history in Israel that all the political players in the central left-wing bloc agreed to have a joint agenda around issues of religion and state as a very clear political plan and not only as a platform. Still, we need to understand that the other set of coalition agreements are the agreements between Yesh Atid and the Yamina, Naftali Bennett's party, and those agreements are concerned to be the master agreements of the new government. And in this master agreement, it is said clearly that without an agreement, we can't promote the joint agenda that I referred to. So it means that we will have to work hard together with Yamina in order to see what elements can implement, because I have one to vote. So I apologize, and I have to leave in order to vote.
Thank you, Gilad. We'll take a rain check, and hopefully it won't be long before we can speak again about these issues. So, Be'atzlacha. Good luck. All right, friends. I'm grateful to Gilad, though I will take up with his staff. They have a problem with the bandwidth, and they should improve the internet connection so that his communications are improved. He has everything but the bandwidth. Anyway, so it's what he spoke about actually provides us with a segue to the issues that I prepared in these slides. I'll try and go through some of that quickly and leave room for interaction. So there is no question in my mind that with all the problems that I will be sharing with you, and the complexities and the contradictions, the bottom line is encouraging. Gilad spoke about it, and some good things in the area of religion and state are going to come out of this coalition. It may not be all that we want. It will surely not be all that we want. But the balancing act will result with positive things happening. But let me take us where Gilad left us and explain what happened with those coalition agreements and why, on the face of it, it may look far better than it really is. I don't know if you read the Chidush newsletter that went out Thursday. I urge you to do it. Actually, I'll send it to all who registered for the webinar, because we have a strong, clear statement coming from Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Kentas for Religious Freedom and Equality, and JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and Chidush on the issue of the women of the wall. And the outrageous, violent, the desecration of prayer books that they were subjected to on Friday when they came for their monthly Rosh Chodesh service. So if you haven't seen it, do see it. And there is a brief write-up about these issues of religion and state in the new government. So what do we start with? We start with the good news. And the good news is that Gilad mentioned the agreement with Yamina, which is called Heskem HaYesod, the basic agreement which, as you will see, all other agreements are subjected to. But there is also a document called the Guidelines Document, Kaveh Yesod, for the new government. And one of the important elements of the preamble is the following statement, that the government undertakes to strengthen the foundations of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. Now, there are repeated references to the Declaration of Independence which cannot be over-exaggerated. Because frankly, this Declaration of Independence contains the core principles that I think we all subscribe to, and we are long overdue in fully implementing. So both the guidelines document and the basic agreement with Yamina, namely between Yesh Atid, that signed all the coalition agreements, and Yamina, which quotes the same provision, but then there are some variants when you look at other coalition agreements on specific issues, which either is a case of some, I don't know, disregard, negligence, what have you, they couldn't get their act together, or in some instances, I think it points to different foci the different parties chose to insist on in their own coalition agreements. So Tikva Hadasha, Gideon Saar's party, in English, New Hope, the parallel paragraph is slightly different. So the government will work to reinforce the national identity and strengthen democracy in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. The state will safeguard the Jewish character of the state and Jewish heritage. So basically what you see is a focus on the Jewish identity of the state. But thank God, New Hope didn't leave it at that, and they continue saying, and will also respect the religions and traditions of all members of other religions in the state of Israel in accordance with the values of the Declaration of Independence. So it's a slightly different focus, and you'll see more of it as we continue. So the coalition agreement with the Labour Party says the government will work. Now, note what Labour chose to focus on and insist on in their agreement. The government will work to strengthen democracy in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence and will uphold full equality of rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion, race, or gender. And the Meretz coalition agreement includes the same clause, namely not only a general reference to the Declaration of Independence, but a specific reiteration of an element that other parties chose not to, not all parties chose to spell out, and certainly Yamina did not. So blue and white, the government will aspire to advance peace, strengthen democracy. This is a very important point now for blue and white, because we need to remember they held the Ministry of Justice in the previous government. And those of you who are following the events in Israel or joined our webinars, you know how often we spoke about the threat to the rule of law in Israel, the attempt to assault the courts and the civil courts, and especially the Supreme Court. So blue and white saw it necessary to stress that it will safeguard the rule of law and the legal system. This is not just, glazing. This is touching the core challenges that Israel is now confronting. And all of this in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, the government will uphold full equality of rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion, race, and gender. And it also says the parties agree to safeguard the Jewish identity of the state of Israel. So there is sort of a balancing act between some of the parties that felt it necessary to stress the Jewish identity, some of them that added the other side, namely, with all of that, we are still committed to treat all religions with a sense of equality, etc. Interestingly, Ra'am, the Arab party led by Mansour Abbas, Dr. Mansour Abbas, who joined the coalition, and I won't be saying much about them, but their agreement was signed a few days before the other agreements. It does not include that preamble. It does not include an explicit reference to Israel's identity as a Jewish and democratic state. But at the same time, they signed the guidelines that I mentioned and quoted from before. So on the face of it, this is a principle that they were willing to embrace. But their coalition agreement mostly focuses on issues that are of concern to the Arab population in Israel. Now, I'm moving now to Israel and the Jewish people. And there are some good news here as well, and Gilad alluded to it. So in the guidelines document, GD is not what you may think, it's the guidelines document. So the government will realize its commitment to strengthening the unity of the Jewish people, will encourage Aliyah, and will enhance mutual understanding between the State of Israel and world Jewry. This is also something we cannot over-exaggerate, because as you know, in the previous government, these issues have been sort of derailed, sometimes with explicit insults and expressions of disregard by key members of the government coalition. This government felt the need to express its commitment to Jewish unity and to improving the dialogue and the mutual understanding. And in Blue and White's agreement, you see that it's a general similar spirit with an added bit. The government will work to bring to Israel Ethiopian Jews within 3 years, namely the remaining Ethiopian Jews, and much can be explained on sort of basis of personal concerns, of personal issues. As you may know, the Minister of Absorption and Immigration is from Kahol Lavan, and it's an Ethiopian female minister. And naturally, Blue and White, as the only party, included a specific, not only demand, but projection that all Ethiopian Jews will finally come to Israel within the next 3 years. Now, in the labor agreement, and Gilad alluded to it, there was a specific addition that stipulates that a division for Jewish renewal will be established and funded in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. This is a very interesting clause, again, with all appreciation that I have for Gilad's sort of positive outlook as to the predecessors who served as ministers of diaspora affairs. The truth of the matter is that none of them was committed to Jewish renewal. None of them was committed to treating non-Orthodox on an equal level. Forget about just equal rights, but this was not what either Bennett or Tzipi Chotoveli, who is now the ambassador to England, probably will be returning soon, and Omer Yanklevitz, the ultra-Orthodox minister from Blue and White. So this is a very important provision. As Gilad said, the fact that Nachman Shai is the minister of the diaspora, who as one of the first things that he did was meet with reform and conservative leadership and make clear statements as to his intentions on opening up and embracing the non-Orthodox streams and all streams equally. A biographical point should be pointed out. Nachman Shai, his name used to be Shaikevitz, and his father, his late father, is one of the founders of Harel congregation. So there is a good lineage there in terms of appreciation of the relevance and importance of Reform Judaism. Gilad mentioned the Kotel Agreement. This is very interesting. It appears in the coalition agreements of Labor, Israel Beitenu, and Blue and White. I understand Labor, but why would Israel Beitenu, which is not particularly crazy about the Kotel altogether, about synagogue worship, and about the women of the wall? But I think that for Israel Beitenu, there was an understanding that the breach of the agreement, the suspension of the agreement, caused damage to Israel-Diaspora relations, to Israel relations with North American or American Jewry. And this was their sort of token gesture to demand that the Kotel Agreement that was signed on January 31st, 2016 be retrieved, and that the resolution of June 25th, 2017 that suspended it be rescinded. Now, here is the problem. The problem is that you will soon see, maybe, I'm watching the clock, you will soon see some of the specific provisions that are included for the purpose of advancing religious freedom and equality in the specific coalition agreements. But as Gilad explained, there is a problem here. And it's as if, you know, these are two spheres, each of them, for their reasons, presented a portfolio that is different. But frankly, according to what we will now see, only one portfolio is binding. So the basic agreement with Yamina, which, as you can see at the bottom, according to all coalition agreements, the basic agreement supersedes all other agreements. So whatever you can find in other agreements is fine. You can talk about it, you can pray, you can dream, you can attempt to administratively advance it, but if it involves legislation, if it involves government policies, in all likelihood, it's wishful thinking. So here is what we find, which sort of, sheds, or whatever the word, the verb is, cold water on our excitement about the prospects of the new government. The status quo regarding issues connected with matters of religion and state will be preserved. And if this general term status quo wasn't clear, including on matters of personal status, conversion, yeshiva students, Shabbat, kashrut, the rabbinate, marriage and divorce, except for matters regarding which it would be decided to advance change. And now two avenues, two options, whether in the framework of this agreement, and as you will see, there are a number of changes that are included and outlined in this agreement, or with the consent of all coalition factions. Well, good luck getting the consent of all coalition factions. For instance, one of the issues that is to be advanced according to some of the agreements is equality for LGBTQ community. Well, as we know, not only is Yamina not particularly fond of the idea of LGBTQ equality, but Ram, the Arab party, which is an Islamist party, is dead set against it. So yes, on an administrative level that is within the authorities of the respective ministers who believe in this cause, there will be progress. But as a general cause, namely the government embracing equality for LGBTQ, probably not in line with this provision. Therefore, no governmental legislation, whether primary or secondary, namely, bylaws, regulations, will be advanced, nor shall private legislation be approved if it constitutes a change to the status quo on religious matters except that which has been explicitly agreed upon. Now, one more general word about religion and state. So in the guidelines document, it says the parties agree that there should be action in order to advance issues of religion and state regarding which there is a wide public support. And this clause is copied exactly as I read in the agreements with Labor, Meretz, and Blue and White. Well, wide public support. I think it's sort of comparable to beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Wide public support is not what we would usually attach to the notion of wide public support, because there is wide public support for all matters of religious freedom and equality. As you could see over the years repeatedly in the annual Religion and State Index that Chidush publishes, and surveys that are done by the Israel Democracy Institute and every other survey on these issues. Clear, wide public support. So when they say that these issues of religion and state should be advanced where there is wide public support, I guess it's when those who possibly oppose change will agree that there is sufficiently wide public support. So let's not hold our breath. So I'll give you a couple of examples and then we'll see what questions were already asked. Marriage and divorce, which obviously is one of the most important areas of concern, and those who have been, hearing us, there are hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens who are denied the right of marriage. So there is going to be progress, but what kind of progress? It's a crippled progress. And even this crippled progress may not come about because, as you can see, it's anchored in the agreements with Israel Beitenu, Blue and White, Meretz, Labor, not in the guidelines of the guidelines document, and not in the basic agreement with Yamina. But what have they been able to get Yesh Atid to agree with them on? To advance the solution to the couplehood status of couples who are denied marriage. Namely, there are two problems in these few words. One, we are not talking about marriage or a marriage status. We are talking about couplehood status. So this is the sort of domestic partnership or a Brit HaZugiyut, as the law is called in Israel, which they are talking about expanding. And the other is, even that is not going to be open for everybody, but only to those who are denied the right to marry, including same-sex couples. So it's not, two Israeli Jews who could marry in the rabbinate and will say, we don't want to marry in the chief rabbinate. That, unfortunately, is not going to be covered under this provision. So that they will be able to be recognized as married, not married. And interestingly, Labor included one other element, which is a problem, and I think we may have spoken about it at one time. Namely, the same thing, couplehood status of couples who are denied marriage, including et cetera, so that they will be able to be recognized and married for all intents and purposes in Israel and other countries. Because part of the problem is that, okay, so you have a couple that's going to be registered in this couplehood registry, and then the husband gets an appointment, or the wife gets an appointment for an American university. Well, they want to go together and possibly bring their children. Wait a minute. The US government requires that the spouse will get a visa only if she's married to him. They don't know, the US administration doesn't know of this couplehood status. That's not sufficient for getting a visa. So for all intents and purposes in Israel and other countries. So that's not yet clear. Well, public transportation on Shabbat is, again, one of the main things that Israelis are supporting. And interestingly, not surprisingly, it appears in the labor agreement. But Meirav Michaeli, the leader of Labor, is the Minister of Transport. So there's probably some leeway and some concessions and some progress that she can generate. Okay, I will maybe stop for a moment here. There are lots of other issues that I wanted to share with you. Maybe I'll just mention one. This who is a Jew conversion, which will sort of indicate to you, actually conversion and the draft, which will indicate to you what are the things that were included in the guidelines document and are part of the agreement with Yamina. So one of them is conversion. And what it says is opening the possibility for conversion by city rabbis, not, God forbid, equal recognition of all conversions. No, there is an internal Orthodox problem here, because the chief rabbinate that's turning to be so fundamentalist, so extreme, refuses to recognize modern Orthodox conversions. Now, there are some cities whose chief rabbi, whose city rabbi, is modern Orthodox. So what they are pushing to do is change the law, and we are talking about a mandatory ordinance, and not ordinance, the Religious Community Change Ordinance back from the British Mandate times. And whereas the current configuration of that ordinance recognizes only conversions that are confirmed by the chief rabbinate, now what they are going to do is say city rabbis can establish conversion courts within the area of their local community, but the conversion is not only going to be recognized within their local community, but rather throughout the country, because once the city rabbi signs a document that attests that the person has been admitted into the Jewish community and changed his religion, that will suffice for the purpose of the ordinance, namely formal recognition, full recognition under the laws of the state, without need for any additional certification. But frankly, that's going to be opening a box of Pandora. Because with all respect to the British mandatory ordinance, and with all respect to those city rabbis such as Rabbi Riskin and Rabbi Stab, who may issue these documents, when these issues will come before Israeli rabbinic courts, they will find that many of the religious judges on those rabbinic courts couldn't care less. As far as they're concerned, these conversions are null and void. And there is precedent, plenty of precedent for that. So in a way, they cared to advance modern Orthodox status, but they are really going to be calling for trouble because they are they will be stopped by the independent authority of the rabbinic courts. I wanted to deal with other issues as well, but I'll stop at that. And let's look to see, I'll stop sharing and let's look to see in the few minutes that we have what questions were asked. All right. Yes, the question was, Austin and Nanny, it's wonderful seeing you. I am delighted. So long we have not seen each other. Good. Ebner Goldstein asks if you could receive the slides. Yes, by all means, I'll be sending the slides to all of you. The question, one question that I saw was, what about the Haredi? Are you going to be able to talk to the Haredi? Frankly, I think that we are diluting ourselves when we are trying to move forward on the basis of attempting to reach a consensus, reach an agreement with the Haredi. There wasn't an agreement before. You saw the headlines. There isn't going to be an agreement in the future. In English or in American, I don't know what the origin for that is. There is a term, heckler's veto. Once you agree to grant the ultra-Orthodox the sort of final say and require their consent, their concession as a condition for progress, you are going to be hitting a dead end. There is ample majority without them. The majority of the public in Israel, repeated polls that we did and others did, such as the Israel Democracy Institute. When the question is asked, do you want the ultra-Orthodox to be included in the government coalition or not? The overwhelming majority are against either including them all together or including them with any kind of a veto power or an extortion power or a coercion power. So no, I don't think that's going to be a priority to try and reason with them and reach an agreement with them. So will the civil authorities take action to restrain this Haredi incitement? The frank answer is probably not. There is a problem, and the problem, I think, exists overseas as well. The Israel Religious Action Center, IRAC, took years attempting to get the state attorney to bring charges against Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, the chief rabbi of Tzfat, who is repeatedly issuing racist statements that Arabs should not be allowed to reside in Tzfat. And just the last few days, the Jews should not be buying from Arabs because the Arabs, all Arabs, the Arabs are out to destroy us. So they should only buy from Jews, etc., etc. Finally, the court ordered that Shmuel Eliyahu be charged, but that hasn't happened yet. So such mild statements as knife being stuck at the heart of the nation, I don't think that's going to get anybody overly excited and feeling the time has come to use criminal law to stop that. Okay, now wait. Okay, what will happen to the composition of the High Court, and is there any prospect that litigation will lead to progress on rights of marriage, conversion, and other elements of religious equality? Shalom, this is a great question, and I don't know. I mean, I see that we are dwindling, but those who still have patience, I'll certainly be responding. This is a key question because there was a process of assault against the Supreme Court. Ayelet Shaked, who wanted to be reappointed Minister of Justice, but couldn't get her way. New Hope insisted that they have it. So she is now the Minister of the Interior. She was proud of the fact that she was able to overhaul the courts by appointing judges, different courts, not just Supreme Court, judges that, share her mindset, conservative judges. Interesting thing in the new coalition agreements is that, again, there is sort of a balancing game here. So it's complicated. I won't attempt to explain it in detail, but the chair of the nominations committee for the Supreme Court, or for all courts, is Gideon Saar, the Minister of Justice, who also wants to overhaul the relationship between the court and the Knesset, but not as violently or vehemently as Ayelet Shaked does. The other member of the nominations committee representing the government is half of the time it's going to be Ayelet Shaked, but half of the time it's going to be Meirav Michaeli, the head of labor. And when it's Ayelet Shaked's turn to be on the nominations committee, half of the lifespan of the new government, one of the two members representing the Knesset on the nominations committee is going to be from labor. So there is certainly going to be more of a balancing attempt in terms of appointment to the Supreme Court, and it'll be much more difficult to railroad problematic appointments. Now, my position is, and I think I wrote it in the last newsletter, with all the hope for change that will emanate from the new government, I think that our best bet still is to push forward with litigation that's aimed at expanding the scope of religious freedom and equality. We stand a very good chance of getting the court to rule on our issues in favor of our position, because on so many of those issues, the law is on our side. The law has been subverted. It has been misapplied, but is on our side. I mean, I'm waiting to see what happens. I have a case before the court representing 8 couples, 2 Reform rabbis from Utah and Chidush, because of the refusal of the former Minister of the Interior to register online weddings that were celebrated via Utah County. Perfectly legal, on the up and up, open, public. But as far as Minister Deri is concerned, this was a way of circumventing the chief rabbinate, and that's not something that he was willing to allow without a fight. And he fights, or fought, dirty, because the authorities already looked into this, the legality and the validity of those marriages, and nevertheless, he ordered them to suspend registration. This has now been going on over more than half a year. And we are waiting for the court to schedule a time to have this argued. But this is the kind of thing that we can move through the courts, and we are involved now with issues of civil burial, and we are involved with issues of the rights of secular soldiers in the army, etc., etc. All these issues should be pursued through the courts. The good news is that in as much as the coalition agreements say no change in the law will be occurring unless everybody consents to it, means that counter legislation also will be tough. Namely, whatever progress we can make through the courts, it'll be very difficult to undo through counter legislation. Marriage, unfortunately, Shalom, is not something the court, other than the Utah marriage, that the courts will help us with, because the court have made it clear already over the course of years. This is something the Knesset needs to be done, because the marriage laws in Israel preceded the basic law on human liberty and dignity, which was sort of the basis for judicial review of Israeli laws. Again, I won't go into the complicated explanation, but no, marriage in terms of being able to hold legal, civil, or reform, or conservative, or reconstructionist marriages in Israel ain't going to happen because of a court decision. Okay, 2 more questions that you are asking, and then we'll, as we say, call it a day. Harold Halpern says, but Uri, there is no majority in coalition for significant, Uri, there is no, but you end with a question mark. So are you asking, is there, or there is no? No, there is no majority for significant reform. And at the same time, to the extent, so in some issues, they can't get all the 61 to vote, but to the extent that they can, and that they can get the coalition to vote together on some of those changes, and there is an agreement to vote on the draft and to vote on conversion and to potentially vote on core curricular studies. And by the way, with regard to core curricular studies, it doesn't require a change in the law. What they are saying is all Israeli students should be studying core curricular studies, and the budget will be used as an incentive to advance that. Well, bear in mind, Avigdor Lieberman, who has no love lost for the Haredi factions and has every commitment to see as many people engage in the workforce, has already made it clear that he's going to be using both positive incentives and negative incentives. So there are things that can be advanced even if there is no majority in the coalition for them. And last question. Please include people with disabilities as a group that need their right protected regardless of religious affiliation. Oh, for sure. Yeah, there is no question about it. And I think that that's one of the things that's going to be certainly looked at positively by this coalition, that put the stress on the rights of everybody and the protection of those rights in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. So, friends, I think that the one thing that you have sensed from this session is that it's complicated. It's complicated, and there is nothing that is straightforward about it, in the sense that you read one coalition agreement and you don't really know whether it represents real viable change or it represents wishful thinking because somehow it does not conform to either the guidelines or the basic agreement. The guidelines and the basic agreement are already a step in the right direction, but they seem to be taking care more of the modern Orthodox, such as expanding the alternatives to the chief rabbinate's kashrut and the chief rabbinate's sponsored conversions. So there will be progress, but it's going to be a limited progress, and it's going to be favoring modern Orthodox, which means we have our work cut out for us. So stay tuned. We'll be sending you updates through our newsletter. Please feel free to write us, challenge us, suggest to us, help us, and we'll shortly announce the next webinar, and I hope to see you all there. So toda, it's already dark outside here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Lehitraot and shalom.
להתראות, יישר כוח אורי.
תודה רבה. שלום חברים.